Superweeds, a threat to food production. Back in March 2023, I wrote about glyphosate in this newsletter. It's one of my most widely read posts. I reminisced about spraying glyphosate-containing Roundup herbicide on weeds at my friend's farm as a teenager in the 1980s and shared my surprise at just how much our usage of and reliance on this mega chemical has increased in the decades since. Glyphosate was used a lot in the 1980s. It's used a lot more now. In the US, its use in agriculture increased by 3,153% from 1990 to 2014. Yes, that's 3,000%. Shockingly, this most widely used agricultural chemical of all time has progressed from a simple weed killer to a crop desiccant, used to dry out food crops like wheat, oats, and beans just before harvest to kill the leafy parts of the crop and allow for easier harvesting. Perhaps as a result, the proportion of US residents with detectable levels of glyphosate in their bodies has increased from 12% of people in 1990 to 100% in 2020. Many scientists believe glyphosate poses risk to food consumers, with the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IARC, classifying it as probably carcinogenic to humans. Even the scientists who were part of glyphosate's early safety approvals expressed their dismay about the chemical. Their opinion that glyphosate was unsafe for use as a herbicide was overturned by senior management at the US EPA in 1984. At the time of my post in March 2023, which came soon after the cancer determination from IARC, a European ban on glyphosate seemed likely, or at least possible. However, a few months later, in July 2023, the European Food Safety Authority said glyphosate is safe. Or more accurately, they said the assessment of the impact of glyphosate on the health of humans, animals, and the environment did not identify critical areas of concern. A few months after that, in December 2023, the European Commission renewed its approval of glyphosate until 2033. So the official word is that glyphosate is safe for food consumers, but it's proving problematic in other ways, like its contribution to the emergence of superweeds. What are superweeds? Superweeds are fast-growing, non-crop plants that have developed natural resistance to commonly used herbicides, such as glyphosate. This evolved resistance allows them to survive herbicides used to control weeds in and around commercially important crops. They were first observed in 1957, but herbicide resistance has now been detected in 273 plants worldwide, including palmer, amaranth, water hemp, horseweed, kochia, and ragweed. Superweeds are becoming increasingly prevalent due to the extensive use of herbicides, which exerts a strong evolutionary pressure on the weeds to develop resistance. Superweeds threaten agricultural land, conservation areas, and waterways. In food production, superweeds pose challenges for farmers as they reduce crop yields and increase production costs. To make a superweed, simply apply severe evolutionary pressure to ordinary weeds by using a lot of herbicide. Most genetic variants of the weed will die, but the few individuals with genes which impart some resistance will survive and continue to breed. Repeat the cycle: more herbicide, more evolutionary pressure, more weed breeding cycles, and soon you'll have superweeds which can survive exposure to the herbicide. Glyphosate is the most widely used herbicide globally. It's sprayed onto genetically modified crops, which are engineered to be resistant to glyphosate so that farmers can eliminate weeds by broadcasting the herbicide across the whole field without damaging the crop. Currently, 90% of planted US corn, soybean, and cotton are genetically modified to be resistant to glyphosate. Unsurprisingly, glyphosate-resistant weeds are becoming a big problem, starting with the introduction of genetically modified crops in the mid-1990s. Since farmers first began to raise the alarm about superweeds in the late 1990s, their prevalence has increased. In the United States, almost 50% of farmers report the presence of herbicide-resistant weeds in their fields, and 3/4 of Iowa fields are infested with common water hemp. In the US, superweeds first became problematic in the South, where some cotton fields can no longer be used due to superweeds, and the threat is currently moving north into the corn and soybean belts. In food production, food crops and food farmers are affected by superweeds in two main ways. One, increased costs and economic impact. Superweeds significantly raise weed management costs due to the need for alternative methods, such as higher herbicide doses, mixtures of multiple herbicides, or labour-intensive practices. In the US, managing glyphosate-resistant weeds costs billions annually. And two, with reduced crop yields and farm management challenges. Superweeds compete with crops for essential resources, potentially reducing yields. Severe infestations can render fields unmanageable, forcing farmers to abandon or rotate crops, impacting long-term planning and the sustainability of farming operations. Superweeds also threaten non-farm environments. As farmers are forced to use more diverse and frequent herbicide applications, the risk of environmental contamination increases, threatening harm to non-target organisms like beneficial insects and soil microbes, as well as riparian, that's river, and marine organisms from herbicide runoff. Superweeds can also spread into natural ecosystems where they outcompete native species, disrupt habitats, and further threaten biodiversity. Based on their current rate of spread, nearly all US fields will be overrun with superweeds in just a few decades, and similar resistance patterns are being observed worldwide. The good news for less wealthy countries is that their lower rates of herbicide use may actually mean a decreased risk from superweeds. In countries like the US, weed management strategies will need to change if we want to keep growing food on an industrial scale. Solutions include the use of cover crops, conservation tillage, crop rotation, and mechanical weeding. High-tech innovations like targeted herbicide applications using drones to minimise overspray and laser weeding could be part of the answer, at least in wealthy countries. Some experts even suggest using biological control methods through natural predators or pathogens. But as the resident of a country that has been seriously damaged by cane toads, which were introduced to control a sugarcane pest, I'd say just don't. As always, I have got links to everything I've said in terms of sources in the email and the post. I've also got some links to read more, including a article called The Rise of Superweeds and What to Do About It, and a link to a peer-reviewed article titled How Did the US EPA and IARC reached diametrically opposed conclusions on the genotoxicity of glyphosate-based herbicides. So that's a mouthful of a title, but an interesting read, that's for sure.